Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today, I have former Congressman Brian Baird, who has served this country for 12 years in the Congress, has been both a academic leader working at both the Pacific Lutheran University as a professor of clinical psychology, and then the president of Antioch University here in Seattle, has served in a number of amazing roles, both in the corporate sector and the public sector. And for the last several years, he is the founder and CEO of the National Museum and Center for Service. So please join me in welcoming Congressman Brian Baird.
Thank you so much.
Well, so let's start off. You had this extraordinary journey in public service, education, private sector, now running nonprofit organizations. So talk a little bit about your life. Where did you grow up? How did your growing shape you and molded you? And then we kind of take it from there.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity and for all that you've done to elevate this notion of purpose. And it turns out that's been pretty prominent in my own life. My father was a school teacher, mom was a homemaker, but we grew up in a really small town in western Colorado where really people depended on one another. And the town was just filled with people who found some way to serve. My dad was a scoutmaster, and mom was a den mother. Dad was in the Lions Club, mom was in the hospital auxiliary. And that's just how it happened. You know, the guy who ran the gas station was my baseball coach, my scoutmaster, other scoutmaster was the postmaster. People just pitched in. And that sense of we have to be here for one another. And the highest calling you have in your life is to give back in some way, either through your professional activity or as a volunteer or through charitable contributions. That's what we do in life. And that guided my choice of professional career. I wanted to be a neuropsychologist so that I could help people who've had brain injuries or suffering from cancer or strokes, etc. And then same with teaching. Teaching is a way to give back as I saw it. And then when the opportunity arose to run for Congress, I thought that's another way you could try to make a difference in your community.
So let's just go back to your childhood. So you're growing up in western Colorado. You're surrounded by people who are basically just showing up.
Yeah.
It's a small town. Everybody's showing up. They're doing different things. And that's really the ethos and the spirit in which you got your education. So talk a little bit about your education, the schooling that you had. What was that imprint? And then, of course, the imprint of your family. Did you have other siblings? How was that life?
Well, that's a really great question. Yeah, I mean, it was just sort of infused in what we did at growing up. Being a scout, you're taught about service as well. And then, when you go to school, there's the big question, what am I going to do with my life? And I wanted to do something that was interesting. I'm kind of a science kind of guy. So the neurological aspect of psychology was intriguing to me. But so was the service, trying to help people who've had hard experiences have a better life. And so that all fits together. But the key driver for me was never like, how do I get rich or famous or anything like that? It was, how can I take whatever talents and opportunity I've been fortunate enough to have and give that back in a way that benefits the broader community? And that's what gets me up every day.
So you finished your schooling in western Colorado.
My undergraduate was Western Colorado. Then I went to University of Utah. I have to confess that was largely for the skiing. Figured out what I wanted to do after I got there. And then I had a great teacher. So much of our lives is influenced by great teachers. I had a practicing clinical neuropsychologist who taught the intro class, and I was hooked. I just thought, this is really, really interesting work. And then I went to University of Wyoming for my doctorate degree. And that was an interesting program because they said, look, we're going to train you in clinical psychology, but if the only thing you do is hang out your shingle and charge people for, 1 hour sessions, that's not going to help rural communities. Rural communities have not a lot of mental health services oftentimes. So if we train you, you need to be not just the clinical psychologist in private practice, but the community psychologist, somebody who helps solve broader problems, whether that's substance abuse or gang violence or homelessness or mental illness, whatever. You have to broaden your lens and broaden what you do. And I took that to heart.
So that's very actually interesting, right? You are not just a professional, but you're also in the business of serving.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, you can go into private practice, but there is a bigger reason as to why you've gone into this space. And it's really great to hear that you got that aspect inculcated in you at a very early age. So you graduate from the University of Wyoming, and that's what brought you to Seattle, I'm presuming.
Yeah, so at the doctorate level in psychology, you do a full year internship. And there are only so many internships that are American Psychological Association certified. And there happened to be a position at American Lake VA down south of Tacoma, near Steilacoom. And I had always read about the Great Northwest and the chance to come out here. And I really believed in trying to help our veterans as well. And so it was a great job. I applied, was fortunate enough to be selected, then fell in love with the Northwest, with the people here, the great natural beauty, Olympia, Seattle, now Edmonds.
So you joined as to finish your internship, and then you obviously joined as a faculty member at the university here.
Actually started in a community college, and I was doing both clinical practice, some private practice, and then working at a mental health center, and then working at the college. And the rationale for that was not just, well, you need two sources of income often if you're a university teacher or a college teacher, because you didn't pay very much. But it was also that by doing the clinical work as well, that's another way of serving, but it also kept me honest, if you will. It's easy if you're in just an academic setting to not appreciate the practical realities on the ground. So if I was teaching students about clinical work, it was humbling to be struggling with some of the same issues myself. So I'd have a difficult case or a challenging situation in the clinic. It kept me fresh and kept me honest about the challenges of the job and the rewards of the job. So I liked very much doing both of those things. And then, of course, over and above that, I was also volunteering on a number of projects and eventually writing a textbook as well. So it's been a rich career with both career choices and avocational interests as well.
So from academia and practice, you decided to go into politics. Talk a little bit about that transition and why did you choose to run for Congress?
Well, the humorous answer is I went off my medication, but that's not the real answer. The real answer is that I had volunteered. Democracy is a participation sport. It's not just given to us. The fundamental ingredient in democracy, Akhtar, I believe, is service. Democracies fail when people are motivated by selfishness, seek power through the democratic process, and then use the power to undermine the democracy. Democracies work when citizens choose people who are motivated by service and the citizens cast their votes in that way. And then when those of us who are honored to be chosen are chosen as public servants to represent people. So to me, that was one other possible way in which I could serve. I had some differences of opinion with the incumbent at the time. We didn't have anybody else who wanted to run. I hadn't held public office. But I'd volunteered on many, many campaigns. I had hammered yard signs. I'd waved signs in the rain. I had passed literature out. I'd been on the phones. I'd done very humble but necessary political groundwork to help other people get elected. Then when no one else wanted to step forward, I said, well, I'll give it a try. We can give it no chance. And ultimately, after the first try was very close, and the second try, I managed to succeed in what was a very highly competitive, nationally targeted race.
So talk a little bit about you served in the 1990s, early 2000s. We are in a very different world.
Yeah, we were.
Talk a little bit about what that experience was as service to the country. And yes, there are political differences, but it was a far more world of camaraderie than what I think it is today. Maybe I'm mistaken, but maybe our listeners would love to know a little bit about that journey. How do you show up from representing your community in the capital of the country?
Well, I said to my team, when I first brought my team on after I got elected, I said, look, we run for office with affiliation to a political party. But once we're in office, we serve everybody. People who worked against us, people who campaigned against us, media who may have not endorsed us, organizations engaged to the other side. That's all over with now. We are now representatives of all the people in the district, and we're going to treat everybody with equal respect. I also made it a point to try to reach out to people from the other side. So I went to a retreat. It was mostly, I was sort of a centrist Democrat, fiscally conservative, socially progressive. And I went to a major orientation retreat, which was exclusively Republicans, and said myself, I wanted to get to know people from the other side. And then I also, almost every bill I introduced, I tried to get Republican co-sponsorship. And some of the most significant legislation I passed was precisely with Republican support, because oftentimes you can find that there are things that unite you, even if there are a number of areas you disagree. And at the time, frankly, things were already getting more polarized by about the time I got in, but not nearly to the degree it is right now. And the extremism and to some extent, the normalization of paranoia and the lack of fact-based and reason-based decision. And the other thing is the animosity. You know, I have a term called affective polarization, which really means emotional division, in which you don't just disagree with the person on the issues, you try to get people to realize, to hate the person as a human being. And that's really dangerous to a democratic republic. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to work on both sides of the aisle, get a lot done. I still have very, very dear friends. Some of my best friends from Congress actually are Republicans. And that's how it should be, because we should be united in our sense of service. But we're losing that out of partisan loyalty and actually, in some cases, sadly, a cult of personality right now.
And, that's a shame, right? I mean, in some ways, partisanship becomes a disservice to the community as a whole.
Yeah. And Washington warned against that in his farewell address. George Washington spoke very eloquently about that risk.
So here you are trying to bring things together. So talk a little bit about some of your achievements. Where did you think you made the most difference in this long service over a decade in Congress?
Well, there were several pieces of legislation I wrote that became law that I thought were really important. One was a bipartisan bill I crafted to allow states to have sales tax, to deduct their sales taxes on their federal returns. That may not seem like much, but there were 7 states, including ours, that were paying higher taxes than I thought was fair. And I built a coalition, D's and R's, from multiple states, Florida, Texas, Nevada, us, South Dakota, a few others. And we worked together. We passed the bill in a bipartisan way. And that made a big difference in terms of saving people resources and money in those affected states. But I also wrote the Stock Act. The Stock Act is the bill that banned insider trading by members of Congress, and that required members of Congress to report their trades much more commonly, or more frequently rather, and promptly than had been done before. In addition, I wrote some legislation that's pretty esoteric to a lot of people, but is really hugely important. The bill that guides research into the thing called ocean acidification, I wrote along with some scientists from NOAA who gave me great advice. Ocean acidification, Akhtar, is when the CO2 that we are so worried about with climate change atmospherically, about half of that gets dissolved in the ocean. When CO2 is dissolved in water, it makes the water more acidic. More acidic water dissolves the calcium, basically, that forms the shells of shelled organisms. So microscopic zooplankton, little creatures that salmon eat, can't form shells. If they can't form shells, they can't live. If they can't live, salmon can't eat them, oysters, etc. It's a big problem. No one was paying much attention to it. I wrote the bill to try to address it, and I wrote a few others like that. But I also took some pretty tough stands that were somewhat controversial. I believed in going places and seeing things with my own eyes. So I, along with Keith Ellison from Minnesota, were the first Americans to go in to visit Gaza after an Israeli bombing and invasion of Gaza that was pretty grisly. And we went to bear witness, but also to learn firsthand. So all that I thought was important, but most important was the ability to serve the average needs of the constituents and the communities I represented. It wasn't necessarily a grand piece of legislation or going to a war zone, which I did a number of times. It was, as much as anything, helping the community meet its own citizens' needs, and even individuals who needed help with Social Security or Medicare or veterans benefits or immigration or whatever. Being there for the people who elected you is really, at the end of the day, probably the highest honor.
So talk about why you decided to start this new chapter with this National Museum and Center for Service.
The idea of Akhtar, we do a good job in our country of honoring military service, and that's really appropriate that we do so. But it shouldn't be, and it isn't, just people in uniform who answer the call to service, and nor should it be only their service that we recommend. As I would travel through my district or around the country or internationally, Everywhere I went, there were people giving of themselves in a spirit of kindness to help others, helping folks after a hurricane or a flood. We had two big floods in my district, and people showed up. They gave complete strangers clothing, food, shelter, medical supplies. They just showed up. When I was overseas, sometimes in war zones and famine areas and areas with disease outbreaks, there were American citizens there risking their own lives. They could have been killed by adversaries in combat situations. They could have been exposed to dreadful diseases. They were. And nowhere in our country, Akhtar, do we honor all forms of service. And that really troubled me. I'll give you one other example. In the first year of COVID, more than 3,600 frontline healthcare workers perished in that disease. Now, that's more than died on September 11th. And every one of those healthcare workers, nearly everyone, knew when they went to work, they were treating people who were dying of a disease that at the start we had no test for, no personal protection equipment, and no treatment for it, and no vaccine for it, no effective treatment. They watched people die every day. They knew they could get the disease. They went anyway, and many of them died, and we have no place in our country for their loved ones or the rest of us to say thank you for your sacrifice. We need places to honor that. We need to recognize that organizations like Rotary, citizen service organizations, have led the international fight to stamp out polio, that the Boys and Girls Club transform lives every day. The Red Cross is there in disasters and does blood supplies. All those are good, positive stories. And you know what? There's almost no place to tell it. So I said, look, let's create such a place. Let's not only create one place in the nation's capital, which I think we need, but what about every single community? Oftentimes communities have memorials or signs or something honoring people who serve in the military. Again, that's appropriate. But every community has people who serve. Every community has places where we could tell those stories. And frankly, most every community has people who could create very inspiring and uplifting displays. So the idea, in a nutshell, is create exhibits honoring all forms of service in all communities and all schools all across the country, so people from all walks of life can be honored and thanked for their service, and others can be invited to join and contribute and participate. That's the idea in a nutshell.
That's such a powerful idea, right? I mean, as you were speaking, I was just thinking about, you put up flags in our gymnasium to honor sports teams.
Yes.
But we don't have flags in the auditorium to honor students that have served in other ways.
That's right. And we have trophy cases. Every high school and junior high has a trophy case, right?
Right.
It's mostly athletic. Sometimes maybe chess club or debate or robotics. But you don't only have to be athletic or super smart. You have to win a championship.
Right.
But what about the kid who gives 20 hours, 30 hours a week to help others? They volunteer in some way. Or they go on, the students who graduate from a school and go on to, cure cancer or something. We don't have any place in our schools to say, look at what this person is doing or will go on to do with their lives. And how refreshing it would be if young people, and all of us of all ages, had examples of people with purpose, as you so wisely say so often, who gained with purpose to make a difference in their lives and the lives of others.
For our listeners who are listening to it, how can they help?
Well, there's a couple ways. Our organization is called the National Museum and Center for Service. Log in there, you'll learn about what we do. We've got free downloadable templates and toolkits and case studies that any person watching this program, if they want, can create their own exhibits of service in their own school or their own community. Our whole idea is give the material, give the resources away. We're not trying to monetize this or get rich. We're trying to say every community, our goal is literally nothing less than every community in America will have exhibits of service in their schools and in places people go publicly, and those will stay fresh, honoring lots of people all year round in multiple places. Right now, there's a real unique opportunity out there. As you know, this year marks the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And there are some formal, somewhat controversial official commissions doing that, but they've become rather partisan, to say the least. We've developed a nonpartisan, non-political way to make service the focus of how any community or organization celebrates the 250th anniversary. And there's a very powerful link between that message of service and the founding documents that we're celebrating. The Declaration of Independence itself ends with the powerful words, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." I don't know how much more you can put on the line to serve others. It's, we pledge to each other, not we're in this for ourselves. Give us our freedom. Don't tax us. Let somebody else go to war. We pledge to each other everything we got, lives, fortunes, sacred honor. And then the Declaration in 1787 picks that thread right up by beginning. So that the Declaration ended with the words that started our nation, and the Constitution begins with words that enshrine service as the purpose of our nation. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That's why we created the country, was so that everybody had a chance to serve and everybody had a chance to prosper from one another's service. So spreading that word in this occasion of the 250th and setting up your own service exhibitions, I can't think of anything more patriotic or appropriate for this event.
As we come to close of our time, for all the young people out there, what is your message that you want them to really show up with purpose, and why is that important?
The question you ask yourself as a young person is, why am I here? And there's lots of ways to answer that. But also, I think you have to say, why are we here? Is what makes a better world? And you have a choice at some point in your life, and countries had this choice. Am I going to be mean, angry, and selfish? Or am I going to be kind, compassionate, and generous? Life is better, countries are better, communities are better when we practice kindness, compassion, and generosity. And that can guide your life. And it doesn't have to be your entire life. I don't care if you're working on the railroad, or as I did my way through college, I hauled garbage and cleaned latrines. That too was a form of service. But you can volunteer. You can contribute charitably. You can help your neighbor. Find something you do and you're passionate about that can help others, and pursue that. Outside the social science research is really clear. People who live purpose-driven lives and engage in service live longer, happier, more meaningful lives, and they're physically healthier overall. So what's not to like about that? Yeah, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you're spending your money to help others rather than the latest toy or the latest trinket or whatever you want. But the satisfaction of giving back is something that never, you can't beat that. And you give it 1,000-fold. You help one person, they get to help others as well. So that'd be my message. Find purpose in your life. Find a way to serve either through your work, your volunteer time, your charitable contributions, or preferably all of the above. And your life and other people's lives and our communities and nation would be better for it.
So let's just end with you sharing your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you live by.
Well, it's this, it's life is uncertain. It's the nature of life itself. And so one should try to never overestimate how much you know or underestimate your ability to learn. Don't overestimate what you know or underestimate your ability to learn.
That is just such a fantastic message. I would just like to kind of summarize a little bit. Service is just about showing up. If you show up as a human being, you are automatically spreading kindness.
Yes.
And if you spread kindness, you're actually investing in building the community. I don't think it is about giving back. I think it is about investment in the future.
Nicely said.
If you show up for others and for your community and for yourself, you are investing in the collective future of humanity.
Yeah.
So
another way to say it, Akhtar, is there 4 of the most powerful words in your life and in the English language are, how can I help?
thank you so very much.
Right, Akhtar. I forgot to mention our initiative on the 250th is called 250 and Beyond. The Beyond meaning it's going to go way long after this 1 year of celebration is over. 250andbeyond.org. If people want to learn more about it, I hope they'll log in and join us. Thank you. Last but not least, Akhtar, you too have led a profound life of service in so many ways and are continuing to do so in your writing and this podcast and in your teaching, and in your own volunteer and service work. And I'm so inspired by you and so grateful for our friendship and for your leadership and example.
How can you help?
Yeah,
And how can I help?
exactly.
Really, that message that we want to end on, Congressman Brian Baird, thank you so very much for being part of this conversation. The service that you've given the nation, the service that you've given through academia, and now that you're doing by encouraging all of us to recognize people that have served, not just in formal roles, but just showing up in the community as we celebrate our 250th anniversary. Take that to heart. Thank you very much. And again, to our listeners, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to guide humanity forward. Please do that. Thank you.
Thank you.